I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to meet up with my friend Henry and do a photo shoot of his Porsche GT3. It turned out awesome. It was a super nice morning, lovely weather with a good sunrise. We went to a cool spot in Chicago that lets you see the entire skyline and the light hits it perfectly. Now I'm sitting here at my desk and I'm getting ready to edit some of the photos that I took, and I figured I would bring you guys with me to see how I edit all of my car photos. Before we get started, I want to talk about gear real quick. I did use the Sigma f1.4 35mm lens. This is the art lens. You can get these for around $500 for the Sony cameras. It's one of my favorite lenses I own, and honestly, it's amazing for shooting cars. I also have this Amazon Basics circular polarizer filter on it, which is literally like $12 or $14, and it gets the job done. It helps remove reflections off of the car's paint or windshield when you spin it like this. So if you're looking for gear, 35mm 1.4 and a circular polarizer. And that's sitting on my Sony a7 IV, but honestly the camera body isn't that important. The glass matters a lot more than that. Anywho, let's jump into Lightroom and I'll show you how I edit. Alright, so now we're in Lightroom and I found a picture that I want to edit. This is a pretty cool one. It's just of Henry getting out of the car. It's a candid picture that I just snapped while we were moving it around, but I actually think it looks pretty sweet because there's some birds flying in the background and it just kind of shows him and the car, and I think he'll appreciate having it. So the very first thing that I do is actually go to the crop tool, and I usually set the aspect ratio for these vertical photos to 4:5. I just really like the way that it looks, and usually for sharing on platforms like Instagram, 4:5 takes up a good amount of screen real estate, and I like that. So we're gonna crop and straighten it out so that the horizon in the back is looking proper, and that looks pretty good to me. We're gonna hit return, and now we have already a much better looking photo, just that it's straight. But I do notice this photo overall feels pretty dark, so I'm going to want to lift the shadows up. The shadows represent the darker parts of the image, and especially when you're paying attention to like this area where the door seam is, you just can't even see it at all. So if you lift your shadows to 100, it'll brighten all those darkened areas up, but I don't want them at 100. I just want them to be a little bit more visible. So probably about 40, maybe 45 is what I'll set that slider to. And now we can see the before and the after, like you're already able to see a lot more in this image. One thing that's actually bugging me is this lamppost, and Lightroom has recently added a generative AI remove tool, which I use all the time for stuff like this. So we're gonna go to the remove tool, which looks like this eraser, or you can hit H on your keyboard, and then make sure you select generative AI and object aware to get the best possible results. You're just gonna draw over the lamppost and then hit apply, and it's going to run its AI magic and get rid of it. And honestly, it works shockingly well for things like this lamppost, as you see right here. If you zoom out, you would never know that that lamppost was even there, which is awesome. And now I'm actually going to change the crop because I want to tighten up a little bit on the subject, which is Henry and the car. So gonna leave a little bit of room on the right, but not too much. I actually think move it up a little too. I like this crop a lot. Maybe move it a little down. That looks good to me now. Okay, next thing we're gonna do is add some contrast, make the image kind of feel a little bit more punchy. It was looking a little bit flat before, so I'm gonna drag the contrast up to 30, maybe 35. And I think I'm actually just going to utilize the exposure slider to just lift everything in the image, because I'm going to touch the sky up later. But I think that's looking pretty good. So before we get to the colors and the white balance, I am going to add some sharpening. I'm going to drag the sharpening slider from 40 to about 80. I shot this image in RAW. If you're not shooting your images in RAW, it is the best way to do it. You're gonna get the most amount of data to edit in post. JPEGs can look great out of camera, but if you wanna manipulate things in Lightroom, RAW is the way to go. And with that, sometimes you need to sharpen the image up, and we're gonna do that by leaving this at 80. Next thing I'm going to do is play with the clarity slider. I usually like to lift this up to anywhere from 10 to 20 when I'm shooting cars. Sometimes I just leave it at 0. Depends on the vibe I'm going for. I think 10 is a pretty solid number for this slider here, because you'll see when I lift it to 100, it kind of like crushes a lot of the darker parts of the image, and it makes it look like super edited. And like, there was an Instagram era when people really liked high clarity images. I think that using this slider in moderation is the best way to go about it. But 10 doesn't ruin the image in my eyes. I think it looks pretty good. So we'll leave it there. And next up, we're going to start playing with the white balance. Now, when I shot it, I was using the auto white balance on my camera because RAW photos let you edit the white balance in post anyway. So I do kind of want to warm up this image. So I'm going to raise it to 6,700 or maybe even 6,800, I think is probably going to be a good fit. And you can see in the before that it's a little bit cooler. The blues are a little bit bluer and the ground has a little bit less warmth to it, but I actually really like the way that this looks right now. And because this car is blue, I'm gonna go to the color mixer and select the blue and actually add some blue saturation. Like most of the sliders, you wanna do this stuff in moderation, but I do wanna show off the cool wrap color on this car, which is called Narwhal Blue, by the way. But I think it looks a little bit better with some added saturation. I'm gonna do 20 on the saturation slider and probably about 10 on the luminance. You can make it look a lot brighter or darker with this luminance slider, as you can see, but going to the extremes usually isn't the best route with that one. I'm also gonna punch up the vibrance to about 10 or maybe 15 and just kind of get a little bit more color in there. And I think that's looking good for the basic edits. Now let's jump into the masking, which you select over here. And this part's super fun because you can control the areas of the image that you're making changes to. So Lightroom has a really good sky mask, which we're just gonna select, and it's gonna find the sky in the image, and it does it very quickly. It shows it in red. And we're gonna drop the highlights because we can see that there's nice orange kind of sunrise lighting going on there. I might even lower the exposure of the sky a little too. You don't want to do it too much because then it can look a little bit fake. But if you just lower it to the point where you get those nice colors without like making it seem too fake, that looks pretty nice to me. You can also play with the contrast slider and see if that adds a little bit of depth, and in this case it most certainly does. I quite like the way that that looks. So leaving that contrast turned up looks pretty sweet. And I'm gonna see what the shadows in the sky might do. Don't think I wanna touch those too much. I'm gonna lower it to like -16. But I think those edits on the sky make a huge difference. Let's look at the before real quick and the after. So you can see we're making really big changes now with everything that we've done so far. And now I'm gonna hit L, and that adds a linear gradient where you can drag this nice gradient mask. And I always like to do this from the bottom of the image when I'm shooting a car. If there's ground leading up to the car, I usually just do a gradient and I lower the exposure. And I think that this just kind of adds a little bit of depth and foreground kind of to the image where it didn't have this like darkness on the ground before, and it kind of puts more spotlight on the car itself. So here's the before, here's the after. I think this image looks great. Might actually brighten it up overall with the exposure slider a tiny bit, but I actually really like the way that this turned out. Oh, one last thing. I'm noticing these kind of weird dots that aren't the birds, and maybe they are birds, but they look a little bit weird. I'm just gonna remove those real quick. For this, you don't really need to use the generative AI. You could just use the remove tool, and when it's a tiny little speck on a big blue sky, it's usually pretty good at detecting what you want to get rid of there. So in this case, it's actually messing this one up. Why can't it get rid of this bird? Lightroom, I have a quick question for you. Why can you not get rid of that bird? It's getting rid of the other ones totally fine, but for some reason it's leaving this weird white speck in the sky, and it looks like a UFO as far as I'm concerned. I cannot get rid of it using the remove tool. And this tutorial is not gonna go into Photoshop. So we're gonna live with it. This photo is good. On to the next one. So this next photo is pretty sweet. I had Henry step on the brakes to get the brake lights turned on while we were facing the skyline. And we're gonna take a similar approach. We're gonna crop it to a 4:5 aspect ratio and try and straighten it a tiny bit to make sure that our horizon line is good. And actually, I think it might have been pretty straight out the box. So that's looking pretty good. This photo is definitely looking pretty dark, so I'm just gonna bump the exposure slider up until we get it to a point where I feel like it's looking pretty bright. And we're gonna add some contrast in. For this one, I think we can go up to about 35, and that's already looking a ton better than what we started with. I think, like the last photo, the shadows are kind of dark, and we are gonna bring those up. I don't think I'm gonna bring them up as much as I did in the last photo, but looks like bringing them up to about 25 or maybe even 30 makes a pretty nice difference. You can see a little bit more detail in the tires there. I think we're gonna match the temperature of 6,800 that we did in the last photo. I feel like that kind of fit this pretty nicely here for this time of day. And honestly, using the similar settings, if you shot in the same like backdrop and same scene, can get you really good results. Copy and pasting preset for the same photo shoot sometimes works really nicely. Now I am going to want to raise the luminance of the blue. I feel like this is a little bit darker than how it looks in person, so I'm going to raise the luminance to about 40 or so, and I think that that captures the blue a little bit better. And for this one, I think the clarity slider could... Nah, we're going to leave it at like 10. I was going to say maybe we could crank it up, but just kind of makes it look too fake and weird. Bump the sharpening up on this. And now let's get to the masking. We'll start with the linear gradient and create the dark kind of leading into the car. This one we can actually make the gradient a little bit smaller and drop it a little bit. Let's see kind of how that looks. I think that looks really nice. Now let's capture the sky with the Adobe Sky Mask and then lower those highlights again. Yeah, you can already see how much that brings out some of the gold tones on the buildings, and maybe even lower the exposure a bit. That looks nice there. Let's add some contrast. Maybe even lower the temperature to get a slightly bluer sky out of that. Let's see what the saturation slider does with the sky mask. So obviously when you put it up all the way, it looks oversaturated, but I think adding a little bit doesn't hurt. So putting it to about 20 should do. And I'm thinking that this photo is actually looking pretty nice now. I like the way that it looks. Here's the before and here is the after. So for this last photo, we're actually facing the opposite direction now, away from the lake. And we have a slightly different backdrop and slightly different lighting scenario to work with. So we're gonna start again by cropping the image. We're gonna do 4:5, and I wanna get this grass out of the shot. So I'm gonna try and crop in like so. So that way, all we have is the cool sculpture in the background and the actual planetarium. No more grass, and honestly, we cut out a lamppost without having to use the remove tool, which is always great. And now let's get to the actual edit. I think with this one, it looks pretty flat, and we're gonna be able to add in a lot of contrast. So I'm gonna move this slider up to like 50, maybe let's actually move it up to 60. And I think that right now it's not looking that great, but if we bump up the shadows to maybe 30 or so, and maybe even push the exposure slider a bit, actually add a little bit more contrast, this already, compared to the base image, is looking really good. I like the blown out highlights in the headlight because I want that light to really look like it's shining. And I think that everything is looking pretty sweet. Now, the White balance in this case looks a little bit warmer and maybe a little greener than I would like, so I'm gonna lower it just a bit, maybe to 6400 instead of 6500. And I'm gonna change the tint. I'm gonna make it 2 points higher at 24 instead of 22. And now this is looking already miles better than what we had. I'm gonna add some sharpening. I'm gonna crank this one up to about 90. And we can really see when we zoom in how that changes it. You can really see those details start to shine. Maybe I won't put it to 90 now that I'm looking closely. 80 should do fine there. And let's actually see how the clarity slider works here. Okay. In this instance, I actually like it. We'll put it up to like 25. And it really makes this car pop, makes the image pop. And I think if we add a little bit of luminance to the blue to kind of make the blue lighter and saturate it a tiny bit more. This is already looking awesome before we even jump into the masks. And I think we're just going to finish it off with that linear gradient on the bottom and maybe adjust the sky to bring out some sky. But drop the exposure on the linear gradient on the bottom here. And let's see what the sky mask will let us do. Let's drop these highlights, add some contrast, maybe lower the exposure. Honestly, in this case, there isn't too much stuff going on in the sky, so this isn't doing a whole lot, but I guess it's better than nothing. That's the original image, and that's the final. I quite like the way this one's turning out. Maybe we can even use the remove tool to get rid of this marble slab or granite, whatever this is, this rock slab. Let's see if it can get rid of this. Oh, I forgot to turn on the generative AI feature. Let's try that again. Sometimes this works really well, and honestly, sometimes it doesn't. I'm a little worried this might be the latter, but we're about to find out. Okay, that's one option. That's two options. That's three options. Okay, the third one is seemingly the best. It still shows a little bit of the slab, but it gets rid of most of it. And I'm just going to use the crop feature and just zoom in a tiny bit. And it's telling me that AI settings need to be recomputed, but this looks pretty good to me, and I'm pretty happy with this final image. So that's the last photo I'm going to edit from this set right now, but yeah, this is looking pretty good. So that was a quick look into how I edit my car photos. I hope that you learned something and have something now that you can take away from this video and incorporate into your own workflow. Obviously, there are many different ways you can edit your photos, and that's the whole point. It's to be unique and creative. So I hope that you take what you saw today and help enhance your own editing journey. With that being said, I appreciate you watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.